I should be live. Hey, everybody, this is Dr. Glenn, and welcome to our Facebook Live. So, we're getting started a couple minutes late. We had a little technical difficulty. Today, we're going to do part two of the gut brain connection. And, we talked a couple weeks ago. By the way, we weren't on last week because if y'all will remember, Facebook went down for like 6 hours or something last week, and I couldn't get the thing set up to do it last week. But the week before we started our brain gut connection idea, and I realized, that there is so much to talk about when it comes to the gut brain connection that there is no way you can do it in just one Facebook Live thing. So we're going to do a series of these over the next several weeks. So today I want to talk about neurotransmitters. So what are neurotransmitters? Well, neurotransmitters, they're like little messengers, and they help nerves and different parts of the body talk to each other. So they facilitate the communication in your nervous system. And some of the neurotransmitters that are really important in our day-to-day lives and in our mood, the actual way we experience our lives, are things like serotonin, dopamine, GABA. Those are kind of the big ones. And let me see what I've got here over on the side, because I know I put a few things together for you. Oh, by the way, let's don't forget, as Hippocrates said, all disease starts in the gut. So that's how important the gut is and all of this stuff. But here are the three big neurotransmitters that I wanted to talk about today: serotonin, dopamine, and GABA. Now, there's a little bit of overlap in what each one of them does, but just in general, okay? Serotonin, it's the one that most people have heard about the most. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter. They call it the happy transmitter, but it's not just happiness. It has more to do with your outlook on life. It has to do with, do you see the glass as half full? Do you have a positive outlook? When you have low serotonin production, it can make you depressed and other things like that. Dopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter that helps you to stay motivated. And one of the things you see in dopamine deficits is people who start a lot of projects and they never finish them, or they've got a lot of stuff they want to do, but they never get it done. That's kind of a dopamine type of problem. And then GABA, GABA stands for gamma aminobutyric acid. And don't ask me to spell that. But GABA is a neurotransmitter that helps keep your nervous system calm, so that when people have GABA problems, they tend to have anxiety issues. Or, in the old days, I'm getting kind of old, we used to call that nervousness. Uh, it's the feeling that there's some sort of impending problem that is going to happen. And so that's those. Let's bring this up here now. Let's talk about each one of them just a little bit. And serotonin, now I put 95% there. Does anybody know what we mean by the 95% thing? Well, what that means is that 95% of your serotonin is made in your, what are we talking about? Your gut. Now, when I was in school, I did my education in the early 80s, 81 to 85 is when I was in school, and we were taught then that serotonin is made in your brain. Why? Well, it's a neurotransmitter. It has to be made in your brain. And that was before we understood anything about this thing called the microbiome, which is all the bacteria that live in your gut. As a matter of fact, the whole time I was in school, nobody ever mentioned a microbiome because nobody knew anything about it then. And so we thought, oh, neurotransmitters are made in your brain. Well, we now know that 95% of your serotonin is made in your gut. So if you have gut problems, what kind of problems are you likely to have? You're likely to have serotonin related things. And this is where our understanding of the integration of all the different systems in the body has become just super, super important. Because everything is connected. So if you have serotonin problems because you're not making enough in your gut, because your gut isn't happy, what could you notice from that? Well, here's a list of some things right there. Depression, I mentioned that just a few minutes ago. You notice depression if you have gut issues. You can have sleep problems. Well, how could you have sleep problems because of your gut not making serotonin? Well, it just so happens that serotonin gets converted into this stuff called melatonin. And melatonin is a neurotransmitter, it's a chemical that helps your body fall asleep. All right. So here's what happens. During the day, when you wake up in the morning, your serotonin should be way up high because that's what wakes you up and gets you out of bed. And then as the day goes along, your serotonin starts coming down. So that by the time you get to the evening, what happens is your serotonin is low. And guess what's happening? Your melatonin, I get my hands going the right way. This kind of doesn't work well on this camera. But what happens is as your serotonin comes down during the day, your melatonin comes up. And so what you have is serotonin gives you energy and cortisol and stuff like that. And what happens is as the serotonin gets converted into melatonin, you get sleepy and you go lie down and off you go. You go to sleep. And if you're having trouble falling asleep at what I call a reasonable hour, whatever that is for you, it could be 9 o'clock, it could be 11:30. It doesn't matter. It's, reasonable is just a reasonable time to go to bed. So let's say I usually try to go to bed 10 o'clock every night. Well, coming up close to 10 o'clock, my cortisol should be coming down, my serotonin should be turning into melatonin, and that should be coming up so that when I lie down, I have no trouble falling asleep. That's good sleep. What else can serotonin deficit cause? Well, it can cause chronic pain. It can cause memory and learning issues. Now, if you're having serotonin problems, they could be manifesting as memory issues. And we think, oh my gosh, I'm losing my brain. Well, it could just be your serotonin levels are low, which is why when we start our patients in cognitive decline programs here at the clinic, what we do is the very first thing that we address is what you're eating. Not only does that regulate blood sugar and inflammation and all of that, but what you're eating has a huge impact on your microbiome, which has a huge impact on how much serotonin and other things that you make. So if you're having gut issues, you're not making enough serotonin, you could end up with memory issues and you could think that you're having dementia. It may not be dementia at all. It might actually just be your gut isn't working properly. What else could it cause? Anxiety, schizophrenia, absolutely. Problems with your body's internal clock, that's your cortisol coming down, your melatonin coming up, that's your internal clock. When you have serotonin deficits, you will often crave sweets and starches. Now, why would that be? Well, if serotonin gives you the feel good joy for life and you don't have it, you might resort to sweets and starches to make you feel good. And why would that happen? Well, it just might happen because sweets and starches stimulate opiate receptors in your brain. Opiate receptors are the same receptors that respond to opium. That's why they're called opiate receptors. And what do? When you stimulate them, they make you feel good. That's why people get addicted to that stuff. They make you feel good. But you can become addicted to sweets and starches. What are starches? French fries, bread, pizza. What is it? There's 3 food groups, right? There's like Coca-Cola, pizza, and I don't know what, but it's like a Saturday Night Live skit. It's a food group. But sweets and starches stimulate the opiate receptors in your brain. If your serotonin is low, you want to stimulate these because they make you feel good and give you joy for life. So you become addicted to sweets and starches, and then your waistline ends up showing it usually eventually. They can also lead to low libido. So libido isn't something that just falls off because you're getting older. It could fall off because your gut's in trouble. All right. So now let's go talk about dopamine. Dopamine is the next big one, and I've got a 70 written there because we now know that dopamine, just like serotonin, primarily is made in your gut. Now, where was your doctor taught that dopamine was made? In your brain. Where do we now know that most of your dopamine is made? In your gut. You can't see me pointing at my gut, but I'm pointing at my gut. Around 70 to 75% of your dopamine is made in your gut. And if you have dopamine deficiencies, what could that lead to? Well, it could lead to chronic back pain. That's interesting. Your neurotransmitters give you the ability to manage pain. All right. Persistent constipation. Well, one of the things that neurotransmitters do is they allow neurons from the brain and other places to talk to each other. If you're not going like you ought to go, it may be that your brain and your gut are not communicating. And it could be that you have a neurotransmitter problem. That is why you're constipated. And you don't fix that by taking Miralax. If you don't go regularly without help, it means you have a problem that needs to be fixed. Constipation is not a Miralax deficiency. It's a cover-up for something else that's going on. You could have something called dysphagia or difficulty swallowing. Again, sleep disorder, fatigue, attention difficulties. So if you take attention difficulties, that could be like an attention deficit disorder, couldn't it? Or like ADD or ADHD. And one of the things that we're learning is one of the best ways to help people who have attention deficit problems is to fix their guts. So if you got a kid in school and he's ADHD, his problem may not be, in his brain, his problem may be his gut. And one of the things that's happened, over the last however many years is we let kids tell us what they want to eat instead of feeding them what they ought to eat. Now, it gets into a little bit of politics and stuff like that and how you're going to raise your kids and so forth. But, a kid that only eats chicken nuggets and French fries is going to have a pretty narrow microbiome diversity, or like no diversity. When you don't have a good microbiome diversity, you don't make good neurotransmitters. You might have attention deficit problems, and they're not because your brain screwed up. It's because your gut screwed up. So when you fix kids' diets, you see wonderful responses in all kinds of things, such as attention deficit problems. You can even see autism spectrum disorders improved by addressing kids' diets. Again, reduced sex drive, hallucinations and delusions, aspiration pneumonia, and these other things. These are all things that go right along with dopamine disorders. All right, let's do the next one. Let me see here. Okay, we'll take that one off. Let's put gamma up here. GABA, gamma aminobutyric acid. Gamma aminobutyric acid, we always call it GABA. And GABA, again, about 70 to 75% of your GABA is made in your gut. When you have GABA deficits, your nerves get closer to what we call threshold. And this goes way back to the understanding of how nerves work. It's called the Melzack and Wall gate theory of neurostimulation. Well, you don't have to remember that, okay? But what happens is when GABA helps to keep your nervous system calm. So when you have a GABA deficit, your nervous system gets closer to what we call threshold, okay? And when it gets closer to threshold, then it will start to spontaneously fire. So what you feel is this nervousness, and that is what we call anxiety. And anxiety is due to not having enough GABA calming down your nervous system. What else do GABA deficits lead to? Chronic stress? Absolutely. There's sort of a vicious cycle here because the number one driver of adrenal stress is gut irritation. All right. If you have gut irritation, it's going to be because your gut isn't working like it's supposed to. Maybe you eat too much gluten or pesticides, or you don't have a good, diverse microbiome making all kinds of stuff. So if your gut's irritated, then your stresses your adrenal glands. All right. So now you're all stressed out, which changes your cortisol and all this stuff. You're not making any GABA, so you don't keep things calmed down. And then you just become a wired up mess. And that's what happens with stress. Depression. See, these things are all interrelated. You can't completely separate one from the other. Difficulty concentrating in memory, back to the attention thing and memory. Muscle pain and headaches. Chronic pain. This again is one of those vicious cycles. Chronic pain is inflammatory. Inflammation, chronic inflammation causes gut irritation. Gut irritation decreases your neurotransmitter production. So what happens is chronic pain suppresses these neurotransmitters. So now you're in a vicious pain cycle. Insomnia and other sleep problems, back to the integration of cortisol coming down, melatonin coming up, serotonin turning into melatonin, and all of this stuff going on that causes you to fall asleep, sleep through the night, then wake up refreshed and energized in the morning. Low GABA activity is also associated with substance abuse and those kind of disorders. Why? Back to what I talked about before with being addicted to sugars and starches. When you don't have enough neurotransmitters, what the body wants to do is stimulate the opiate receptors to make you feel good. You don't think of it this way. You think, I just want to eat pizza, or I just want to eat a loaf of bread, or I want to eat chips all day, or French fries, or whatever it happens to be. Because they stimulate your brain, they make you feel better. The problem is they end up driving inflammation and all kinds of other things too. But low GABA, low dopamine, low serotonin, all of these things will drive addictions as well. Something else that I wanted to talk about here today, because I get here, I'll put this back up there again. Something we call a GABA challenge. Okay, what does this mean? I get asked all the time by people, well, should I be taking some GABA? Well, there's a good reason to take GABA. And it's because it will tell you if you have a leaky brain. Now, what'd you just say? Well, let me explain something. There is a barrier between your blood supply and your brain, and it's called the blood-brain barrier. And what it means is that the filter between the blood and the brain will only allow certain things to cross over from your blood into your brain. So when you have a leaky brain, you can get undigested proteins, viruses, bacteria, you get all kinds of stuff into your brain. That's one of the things we're seeing with COVID now is we got something called COVID brain, and that's where people who get coronavirus, the virus can actually get into the brain if you have a leaky blood-brain barrier. Well, GABA is a molecule that's quite large. So let's say it's the size of a basketball, okay? But the fence that protects that goes around the basketball court is got smaller holes, right? And you can't get a basketball through that hole. So if you're playing basketball and somebody throws the ball and the other guy misses it, it goes up and hits the fence, it stops. It doesn't get across the fence. Okay? Only things that can get through the fence or through the filter are supposed to get outside of the basketball court or into the brain. Now, if somebody comes along and cuts a huge hole in the fence and that basketball can get through, all right, then you have a leaky blood-brain barrier. So here's what you can do. If you want to find out if you have a leaky blood-brain barrier, if you take GABA, and you can get it at CVS and Walgreens and all kinds of places, if you take GABA and GABA is too large to get across a healthy blood-brain barrier, then you shouldn't be able to feel it. Let me say that again. If you take GABA and your blood-brain barrier is in good shape, you shouldn't be able to feel anything. So if you're taking GABA as a supplement and you can tell that you're taking it, in other words, you feel better when you're taking it, what it means is you have a leaky blood-brain barrier, and that's not good. So you don't fix a GABA problem by taking GABA. You fix a GABA problem by fixing your microbiome so that you're making the building blocks for GABA so that you don't need to take it as a supplement. If you take it as a supplement, you shouldn't feel anything. We call that the GABA challenge. And it's a really inexpensive way of sort of checking your blood-brain barrier. Yes, there's a lab out in Phoenix called Cyrex, and Cyrex is a wonderful lab. And I can send them a blood sample, and they can send back the results, and they can say, yes, you have a leaky blood-brain barrier, and that costs several $100. Or you can go down to Walgreens and get a bottle of GABA for a few bucks and take it. And if you feel nothing, that's good. Means your blood-brain barrier is in good shape. And if you do feel it, then you need to fix your gut, and you need to get the zonulin and the other chemicals in your blood come down where they don't destroy the blood-brain barrier, because that makes you vulnerable to all kinds of things. So I hope this has been helpful today. I know it's a lot of information. Let me pop this little fella up here. And that is, let me just make that more readable, get those off. Now, over the next few weeks, we're going to talk about several other things. We're going to talk about SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. We're going to talk about autoimmune disease and the gut. Leaky gut, leaky brain, we've talked about that before. We might talk about traumatic brain injury and how repeated trauma to the brain, like from playing football or soccer, what those do. We can talk about the microbiome and how it controls weight gain. You know, if you've been cutting your calories and hanging out on the treadmill and the weight isn't coming off, there is a good chance that we've got a problem in your gut. Diabetes is related to this, oral tolerance, and a lot of other things. So remember that here at the office at thecarrollinstitute.com, and there's the phone number right there, we offer what we call a discovery phone call. If you'd like to find out more about what we do and find out if we can help you, we have certified brain coaches, certified nutritionists. We have people who can just spend a few minutes on the phone with you, listen to your story. You can ask them some questions and so on and so forth, and you can find out if we can help you. There's no obligation to that, because we feel that, you know, if you want to come and talk to us, that's great. And then if we can help you, we can figure out the next step to take. So if you want to set up a discovery phone call, just call the number, or you can go online and you can get the contact details there. So thanks for being here today. I'm Dr. Glenn, and I'll see you next week for another Facebook Live, and we'll talk about the gut-brain connection, part 3. All right, have a great day, and thanks for spending your lunch with me. Bye.